Alright, so today we are going to focus on exponent rules. This is the first video on exponent rules, and we're going to focus on the product of power rule and the quotient of power rule. And before we get into that, I want to do a little review of what we talked about in yesterday's intro to exponent video. So here's my basic review. If I asked you to expand 2 to the 5th power, knowing that 2 is our base and 5 is our exponent, how would you expand this out? If you said 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, you are correct. The base is the number that I'm going to multiply, and the exponent tells me how many times to list it out. So now I'm going to ask, what would I do to expand out x to the 7th power? If you wrote x 7 times, you are correct. X is my base, 7 is my exponent, so we need to take x and multiply it together 7 times. So now, if I were to ask you to expand out x to the 5th times x to the 3rd, we know we could take x 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and x 3 times. But if I were to look at this entire thing, how could I rewrite that? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 x's. So we can rewrite that as x to the 8th power. And if you have a to the 8th power times a to the 2nd power, you can list that out as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2 more a's. But you can also rewrite that as a to the 10th power. Now, why does this work? Where does this 10 come from? If we look, we have 8 and 2, and 8 plus 2 makes 10. Just like here, we had 5 and 3, and 5 plus 3 makes 8. So this is the basis of where this rule comes from. This is called the product of powers rule, and it says when I take 2 of the same bases, in this case, let's call it x, and we have x to the m power times x to the n power, it's the same thing as x to the m plus n power. We can take x to the m times x to the n and rewrite that by just adding those exponents, but only when the base is exactly the same. So let's go ahead and do some examples with this. Our first example, how can I rewrite y to the 2nd power times y to the 7th power? 7 plus 2 is 9, so you get y to the 9th power. How can I rewrite k to the 3rd power times k to the 10th power? 10 plus 3 is 13, so if you chose k to the 13, you are correct. How can I rewrite u times u to the 14? U to the 15. You have to remember that when there is a u all by itself, it has an exponent of 1. All right, what about f to the 5th power, c to the 9th power? This one's a little trickier. It's the exact same thing because these are different bases, and the product of powers only works, this rule only works, when our bases are the same. Just like when we combine like terms, they have to have the same variable. Since these do not have the same variable, we cannot combine those exponents. And lastly, 3 times v to the 6th times v to the 5th. You get 3 times v to the 11th. Remember, 3 is not part of that. So that was all about product of powers, and now we're going to move on to quotient of powers. And to do that, we have to have another basic review. So the first question I ask is, what is 2 divided by 2? If you said 1, you're correct. Remember that when you have the same item on top of the fraction as on the bottom, they make ones. Some people call that canceling out, but we're going to say they make ones. If I were to take x to the 5th divided by x to the 3rd, I can expand that out as 5x's on top and 3x's on bottom. And then I can use this idea of making ones to cancel things out. So I'm going to make some ones by crossing out the top and the bottom, those that match. Because it's an x on top and an x on bottom, I can make ones. And I'm going to keep making ones until I can't anymore. And then what I'm left over with is my answer. So here I'm left with 2 x's, which means I have x times x, which is x squared. Now, where did this x squared come from? Is there a quick way to do it like we did for product of powers? Well, if I look at my original exponents, 5 and 3, how does 5 and 3 become 2? We're going to subtract in this case. So, the quotient of powers rule says, when you divide two bases that are the same, so in this case, x to the m power divided by x to the n power, it's the same thing as x to the m minus n. We're going to subtract our exponents now. So let's go ahead and do some examples. Our first example, y to the 7th divided by y to the 2nd. 7 minus 2 is 5, so if you put y to the 5th, you are correct. X to the 8th divided by x to the 7th. 8 minus 7 is 1, so if you put x to the 1st, you are correct, but you can also just put x. A to the 17th divided by a to the 15th. 17 minus 15 is 2, so a to the 2nd. J to the 3rd divided by j to the 3rd. This is j to the 0, which is just 1. Remember, when I have the same amount on top and bottom, they make 1s. So in this case, we just have 1s. And last but not least, x to the 20th. Actually, I think there's 2 more examples. X to the 20th divided by x to the 15th. 20 minus 15 is 5. And m to the 10th over m to the 3rd. 10 minus 3 is 7. So now you know how to do product of powers and quotient of powers. And you are all set for today's video.